There is an unspoken, terrifying realization that completely shatters the ego of a manipulator, and it happens the exact moment they realize you are no longer afraid of the dark. For their entire existence, toxic people rely on one fundamental primitive human fear to keep you entirely under their control. The fear of isolation. They use your deep natural desire for connection against you. They constantly hold the threat of abandonment over your head. They engineer situations where you feel like if you do not comply, if you do not bend to their ridiculous demands and swallow their disrespect, you will end up completely alone. They pushed you away, pulled back their energy, and essentially exiled you, fully expecting you to wander the desert for a few days before crawling back to them on your hands and knees, begging for a single drop of water. They wanted you weak. They needed you dependent. They orchestrated your isolation as a punishment, genuinely believing it would be the exact thing that finally broke your spirit. But you did not break. You stepped into that isolation. You looked around the empty room, and instead of panicking, you took a deep breath of the cleanest, most unpolluted air you have ever tasted. You did not crawl back. You stood up, completely squared your shoulders, and you realized that being entirely alone is not a punishment. It is the ultimate, untouchable cheat code to massive, accelerated evolution. You have to understand the absolute psychological chaos you are causing them right now. You are operating as a completely solo entity, and it is making them violently panic. They are watching you from a distance, totally shook because their primary weapon, the threat of their absence, has been completely neutralized. They look at your life, expecting to see a fragile, broken victim who is desperate for a support system. Instead, they see an absolute machine. They see a completely self-sustaining titan, moving with a heavy, calculated, terrifying momentum. You are not posting sad quotes about being lonely. You are not jumping into a new, chaotic friend group or a toxic relationship just to fill the void. You are sitting in the absolute silence, completely unbothered, entirely focused on building your empire from the ground up. To a narcissist, your ability to thrive in solitude is a literal glitch in the matrix. Their entire reality is built on the concept of supply and demand. They constantly need an audience. They need a group of enablers around them to validate their fake persona. If a toxic person is left entirely alone in a room, their ego will start to suffocate because they have no one to drain. They cannot generate their own light, so they have to constantly steal it from others. So, when they look at you, generating your own massive, blinding light entirely by yourself, their unevolved brains cannot process the math. It absolutely terrifies them. They cannot comprehend how a human being can be so incredibly self-sufficient. They are sitting around right now, desperately trying to cope with the reality of your independence. They are spinning these pathetic, hilarious little narratives to their mutual friends. They are saying things like, "Oh, they isolated themselves because they are arrogant," or "they push everyone away because they have issues." The level of intense, suffocating projection is actually embarrassing to witness. They have to tell themselves these fake stories because the undeniable truth would completely crush them. The truth is, you didn't isolate yourself because you have issues. You isolated yourself because your tolerance for fake, low, vibrational, parasitic behavior dropped to absolute zero. You didn't push everyone away. You simply raised the absolute standard of your aura, and their cheap, manipulative energy could not afford the new admission price. When you finally make the conscious decision to operate entirely alone, you do something incredibly powerful. you permanently eliminate every single energetic leak in your life. I want you to really sit back and think about the staggering, astronomical amount of vital life force you used to bleed out every single day. You were walking around with your spiritual battery constantly draining to zero because you had all these toxic, parasitic background programs running in your mind. You were desperately trying to manage their chaotic, unhinged emotions, acting as an emotional sponge for their negativity, while completely neglecting your own soul. You were essentially playing the role of a full-time, unpaid therapist for an individual who was absolutely committed to staying sick. Think about the agonizing hours you spent staring at your ceiling in the dead of night, violently overthinking their calculated mixed signals. Think about the massive intellectual bandwidth you wasted trying to logically decode their pathetic lies, trying to mathematically make sense of a person who thrives in pure chaos. You were bending over backwards, walking on eggshells, desperately trying to keep the peace in a dynamic that was fundamentally designed to destroy your self-esteem. It was an exhausting, low, vibrational trap designed to keep you weak. But the exact moment you went solo, the moment you embraced the heavy silence of your own company, you essentially took a massive heavy-duty tourniquet and completely stopped the bleeding. You brutally severed the cord. The sudden rush of mental clarity you experienced was like a literal glitch in the Matrix. Without their constant drama clouding your vision, you realized how much power you actually held. You didn't just walk away, you aggressively reclaimed 100% of your psychological real estate. And instead of letting them rent space in your head for free, you completely evicted them, demolished the miserable shack they built, and constructed an impenetrable, high-tier fortress in its place. Your new aura expanded to fill the void, and now your mind is an incredibly exclusive, highly protected asset that their cheap energy can never, ever trespass on again. You took every single drop of that recovered, high-frequency energy, and you injected it straight into your own massive, unapologetic, physical, mental, and financial expansion. While they were busy checking their screens, desperately hoping you would finally break and reach out, you were waking up in the early hours of the morning, entirely unbothered by the absolute peaceful silence of your phone. You didn't just casually go to the gym. You went in there with a dark, terrifying intensity. You started lifting heavier, running faster, and pushing yourself past the point of exhaustion, literally sweating out every single ounce of the disrespect they ever handed you. You were actively forging a massive, intimidating physical armor that perfectly reflects the unbreakable titanium of your new mindset. Your physical frame literally became the visual manifestation of your untouchable aura, leaving anyone who ever doubted you completely shook. You didn't stop at the physical either. You completely dove headfirst into your ultimate purpose. You turned your life on do not disturb, locked the door, and started executing at a frequency they cannot even begin to comprehend. You started reading devouring high-level knowledge and relentlessly building deep, heavy streams of income that make you entirely bulletproof to the opinions of small-minded, toxic individuals. You discovered that massive financial freedom is the ultimate cheat code to emotional detachment. When you build your own kingdom, you never have to tolerate a single second of manipulation from peasants who bring absolutely nothing to the table. You essentially took your isolation and completely weaponized it. You turned your solitude into a hyperbolic time chamber. While they were still out there every single weekend, standing in the exact same crowded venues, desperately seeking attention, and having the exact same exhausting, dramatic arguments with the exact same rotation of miserable people, you were quietly operating in the shadows. You were silently, ruthlessly upgrading every single metric of your human existence. The contrast between your rapid evolution and their pathetic stagnation became so extreme that when they finally catch a glimpse of your new lifestyle, it looks like a literal glitch in the matrix to them. They are forced to aggressively cope with the agonizing reality that while they were busy playing childish games, you were quietly, permanently securing the crown. And now, they have to deal with the absolute terrifying monster they accidentally created with their own two hands. They crafted this entire scenario specifically to break your spirit. They wanted to weaken you by leaving you completely alone, aggressively pulling away their fake support system and betting everything on the assumption that you would instantly crumble in the dark. But the crushing, heavy pressure of that solitude is exactly what turned your soul into a flawless, unbreakable diamond. They essentially threw you into the fire, sitting back with an arrogant smirk, fully expecting you to turn to ash and blow away in the wind. They expected you to lose your mind in isolation. They had absolutely no idea that you were going to use that exact same fire to forge an impenetrable mental armor. Now, they are entirely shook, standing completely paralyzed as they watch you walk out of the flames completely unharmed, wearing the fire as a literal crown. To their outdated, fragile egos, your survival is a total glitch in the matrix. They cannot process how the weapon they designed to destroy you became the exact cheat code you used to elevate your entire reality. You proved to them that you do not need a massive circle or a fake army to win the war. Because large groups always have weak links, and you eliminated every single weak link the day you permanently cut them off. You showed them that your new aura is so dense, so incredibly self-sufficient, that it requires absolutely zero outside validation to dominate the room. You are the entire fated army. You are the strategist, the soldier, and the king all wrapped into one untouchable entity, leaving them to desperately cope with the brutal fact that their greatest betrayal was actually your ultimate upgrade. Because you operate alone, you are entirely unpredictable. That is what generates the maximum amount of panic in their nervous system. When you had them in your life, they knew your next move. They knew your schedule, your weaknesses, and your triggers. But now, you are moving completely in the shadows. You make massive life-changing moves without announcing them to anyone. You drop massive victories out of nowhere, completely disrupting their stagnant reality. They have absolutely no intel on you. They cannot sabotage what they do not know. You have completely starved them of information, leaving them to drown in the deep, dark ocean of their own paranoia. They will spend the rest of their lives entirely intimidated by you. Even if they never admit it out loud, their subconscious mind knows exactly what you are. They know that a person who can sit in an empty room, completely at peace with themselves, and quietly build an empire is the most dangerous type of individual on the planet. You cannot be manipulated because you do not desire their fake validation. You cannot be threatened with abandonment because you have already mastered the art of being entirely alone. You cannot be bought because your peace of mind is infinitely more expensive than anything they could ever possibly offer you. You completely flipped the chessboard